Welcome back, students, to our TMN3702 Teaching Home Language video lessons. Today we'll be covering Unit 2, where we'll be looking at teaching a home language in a multicultural context. So we will first take a look at home language, first additional language, and second additional language. So I've just added those abbreviations there. We will look at what is multilingualism. We will then look at switching and mixing codes. Then we will look at TransLanguaging. So it's quite a difficult word to say, but I will take you through what that concept is. Then we have culture and language teaching. Then lastly, we'll look at languages with high and low status in South Africa. And then we will do a brief activity together. So looking at our context being South Africa, we have 11 official languages, but we do recognize 15 other languages as well, taking into consideration that we have a lot of foreigners in our country and people who do not speak only the 11 official languages. Okay, in a multicultural and multilingual society such as South Africa, you are most likely to be exposed to learners that speak a range of different languages. Okay, there are some learners who have more than one home language, and there will be foreign learners who attend South African schools. So it's just important to take into consideration the amount of languages that you will be exposed to as a teacher in South Africa. Okay, so to break it down, the home language level is when language proficiency that reflects the basic interpersonal communication skills required in social situations and the cognitive academic skills are essential for learning across curriculum. So this is looking at the home language level, and in most cases, children who are learning in their home language, their level is quite good, and that's important for obviously when they are learning. It does become tricky when children are not being taught or they're not learning in their home language. That's when it becomes a little bit difficult for them. Okay, so the first additional language is a language which is not a mother tongue, but which is used for certain communicative functions and is in most cases the medium of the learner and teaching in education. So it's important to note that if you are teaching in a specific language, it might not be every child's home language. So it's important that you support, the learners in the class. Then looking at the second additional language, it is a language that most learners only encounter within the classroom, but not commonly used in the community. So I will use Afrikaans as an example. Afrikaans is a lot of South African children's second additional language, but it's often a language that they don't use outside of the classroom. Okay, so they learn it at school, but they don't get to practice it within the community or within their home space. Okay, a brief breakdown of what multilingualism is. So I did speak about this a little bit in the previous unit. So here it is where many people are multilingual and use more than 2 languages in their everyday. So that means that they either were brought up learning 2 languages at the same time, or they were also fortunate enough to learn a language through their social situations or school environment. Okay, language is an essential expression of a learner's life, and it is important to remember that all languages are important. So it is important that children who do come to the learning space, and if the medium that you are teaching in, the language that you are teaching in, is their first additional language, it's important to also encourage and show the importance of their home language. So, don't entirely take out certain languages from the learning space. Encourage, the different languages and encourage children to use the different languages. Okay, switching and mixing code. So we usually know this as code switching. So speakers that switch from one language to another is called code switching. So for example, if you are teaching in English, but a lot of your learners are isiZulu speakers, you would switch from English to isiZulu to make sure that children are understanding the instruction and the content. Okay, so you use code switching when you are trying to give an accurate presentation of an event, as there are some phrases in isiZulu that you can't say in English, and same as phrases in English that you can't directly translate into isiZulu. So sometimes you might use the two languages interchangeably to explain or present something in an accurate manner. Okay, in a multilingual learner-centered language class, code switching will occur. So this is very common in a multilingual classroom where children will use their own home language and then code switch and interchange from their first additional language to their home language. So it's important to also encourage that interchange of language. Thinking skills are developed by learning to read and write in your own language. Okay, so in your home language. These thinking skills are then used when learning to read, write, and speak in an additional language. So it's important to also incorporate the thinking skills and not only the 4 language skills. Okay, when learners are involved in activities that require cooperation from and discussion with their peers, code switching should be permitted. So as I said previously, it's important to encourage an environment that allows code switching and allows different languages to be spoken within the space. Code switching assists in promoting a shared understanding. So if you are an English speaker and I'm predominantly an isiZulu speaker, we can code switch in order to bring some kind of understanding between the two individuals. Okay, so kind of making an understanding meaning of what's being spoken about. All right, so there's a difference between code switching and code mixing. So it's important to get an understanding of the different two concepts. Okay, so code mixing occurs when someone switches languages repeatedly within one sentence. So it's important that you understand that code switching is when I will say 2 sentences in English and maybe then translate the 2 sentences in Zulu. Whereas here, code mixing is when I'm using isiZulu and English in one sentence. Okay, so I cannot complete a sentence in one language. Okay, according to the researcher Sudra, code mixing is often viewed as a negative phenomenon by language developers, teachers, and speakers. Code mixing has been regarded as a sign of laziness or mental sloppiness and inadequate command of language. So this shows that if a learner is code mixing, it shows that they have very little understanding of the languages that they are using. It has been also claimed to be detrimental to the health of the language. The traditional pedagogical resistance to code mixing stems from a combination of puristic attitudes and the use of a monolingual paradigm of language. So it's important to note that code mixing and code switching are 2 different concepts. So it's important to see that code switching is encouraged, whereas code mixing is not encouraged. Okay. He also maintains that this type of attitude devalues many aspects of multilingual behavior and is unnecessary because recent research has shown that code mixing is common in multilingual situations and tends to be used by speakers who have good language skills in all the languages they mix. Okay? Code mixing is therefore a multifaceted and appropriate way of speaking within multilingual communities, and is also a form of translanguaging. Okay? So translanguaging is a way of bringing the switching and the mixing together. So this is a new concept that has been recently developed. Okay, so I'm going to go onto that. So even though they say that code mixing should be discouraged, he then goes on to explain that code mixing is actually a form of translanguaging. Okay, so it is defined as a deployment of a speaker's full linguistic repertoire without regard for watchful adherence to the socially and politically defined boundaries of named languages. Okay, so here it just shows that even though we see languages as separate or as a social aspect, there can be boundaries that can be crossed between the different languages, depending on the social and political circumstance. It is important to remember that languages are not separate entities, and in many ways that they are connected. And I've said this before, where we need to think about languages as a connected entity. Okay, so certain languages can be similar. So, for example, there are a few African languages where if you can speak one, it is easy to, pick up another. So in that way, they are quite interconnected with each other. Okay, translanguaging works well in the classroom if the children and teacher share the same additional languages. Okay, it can provide your learners with an opportunity to understand concepts in depth. So this means that you are transferring information from one language to the other, and also transferring information to learners using one language and another. Okay, so children may understand, let's say, isiZulu quite proficiently. Okay, but if they are home language English speakers, we may want to incorporate English or another African language to really make them understand a concept in depth. Okay? Again, it is important to respect all languages in the classroom and provide an environment that allows and encourages translanguaging and so forth. So remember that translanguaging is not entirely a new concept, okay? They have brought together code switching and code mixing and have made this translanguaging concept and development of language. Okay, so culture and language teaching. So it's often said that language is culture and culture is language. In a multilingual classroom, there will be differences in life, worlds, and philosophies, also in learning styles, behavior, sense of humor, and nonverbal communication. Okay, so it's also important as a teacher to, educate ourselves on the different cultures we have in South Africa. Okay, because there are certain gestures and certain behaviors that may not be something we are used to, but it's important that we respect those kind of gestures and behaviors and learning styles within the classroom. Okay, so often there are times where a teacher will say, "Look at me when you're speaking to me," but in some cultures, it's actually very disrespectful to look at your elders in the eye when you're speaking to them. So, things like that is important to remember. To deny or ignore cultural differences is to negate a child's experiences and to undermine his or her self-image. So then, identity then comes into play because children will then start questioning their culture and start questioning their identity and their self-worth and their self-image. Okay, so it's important to Really encourage and respect the different cultures that you are exposed to within your classroom. Okay, so it's important that we recognize and respect one another's cultures and languages in order to have a successful language teaching environment. Language connects us to our culture, so being exposed to different languages also allows you to be exposed to different cultures. When teaching a home language, it is also essential to look critically at the learners in your class and determine whether all of them are in fact home language speakers of the language you are teaching. It might be the case that you are teaching English as a home language, but a large group of learners in your class speak Afrikaans, isiZulu, Sepedi, Setswana, or one or more other African languages at home. So it's important to really, even though parents do encourage a lot more English speaking activities and experiences, it is important to bring up the different home languages within the classroom. Also, so that children can, relate to you and understand and say, you know what, my teacher is actually really trying to speak isiZulu, even though it's not her home language. Okay, then looking at languages with high and low status in South Africa. So it's often said that English is, the be end and end all of all languages. But I beg to differ, and I think we in the times where we are realizing our Africanness and how important it is to hold on to our African languages. So although South Africa has a multilingual policy that recognizes many official languages, not all languages are equal in terms of status associated with language. So it's often you will see that someone's an isiZulu speaker at home, but when they are at work, they will not speak their home language. They will rather choose to speak English and so forth. Okay, this creates a power struggle, and inequalities tend to develop, especially within the workplace, especially within the school environment. So it's important to really encourage that all languages are equal. Then going on to what I just spoke about, English. So English has a high status as an international language, and the fact that it is associated with upward mobility, access to tertiary education, and economic prosperity in the Western world has meant that in many countries, including South Africa and Africa as a whole, English has become the lingua franca, where as well as the medium of education in schools and universities. So lingua franca is basically that it is held up on a pedestal and it is the be end and end all of languages, okay? And that is not the case. I think as humans, as people in society, we are very westernized and we tend to, kind of follow the Western world where English is above and beyond, whereas we should start, respecting and holding our Africanness and our African languages higher than the English language. This high status enjoyed by English has a negative influence on African languages, whereas Sidra says that they lose status, identity, and role in spite of being spoken as first language by numbers of people far in excess of those who have English as a first language. It is this state of affairs that causes English to be referred to as a killer language. So it is taking away the status and the quality of our African languages. All right, so the activity that we will prepare for our live lesson is to just briefly define these certain concepts that I looked at in the PowerPoint. So I want you to write down a brief definition. It's important that you write it in your own words. What is multilingualism? What is home language? What is first additional language? What is second additional language? What is code switching? What is mixing codes? What is translanguaging? What does it mean by high and low status languages? Explain the relationship between culture and language, and then also look at the implications of all of the above for language teaching. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get you to write this in your home language, in your own words, home language. So it doesn't matter if your home language is not English, you can write it in isiZulu or whichever language that you prefer. And we will discuss and look at it in our live lesson coming up. All right, students, I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to listen to my video. I look forward to engaging with you in our live lesson. Have a good afternoon.